Now, I want to just talk about pivoting because it drives me insane. Everyone seems to be got diseased or infected by pivoting. We're pivoting here, pivoting there. And I touched on this last time. I said that this is one thing that drives me mad as a supply chain person, is that a pivot, in my definition of a word, is just a relatively small change within an operating capability we already had, which we'd make to realize either because of a burning platform, something happened to us, we had to, or it was a commercial opportunity such as making PPE. So we just pivoted, we just changed slightly our method of production if we're CPG to do this, and we pivoted, but suddenly everybody's pivoting like crazy. And the trouble with, while we're talking about pivoting and it's very fashionable and it sounds very dynamic and wonderful, we actually are not doing what we really need to do, which is a major rethink of supply chain network design. And I would ask people who are in the throes of pivoting just to step back and actually think about, are we missing a trick here? Should we be changing our operational model? And I would argue, should we be changing some parts of our business model to better respond to things that are going to be ahead of us during the next few years?
Welcome and thank you for joining me today. My name is Gary Newberry. I'm a senior executive on call helping businesses in the make, move, sell flow of consumer goods and services. My purpose is to inspire business leaders, particularly those within the consumer products and retailing space, to think big, be bold, scale, adapt and win, one epic supply chain transformation at a time. There's additional content available through my website, RetailAID.ca, or on my YouTube channel, RetailAID. Be sure to check it out. As the business world faces much volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, organizations need to be tapping into resources with an inside edge on transitioning their teams to be agile, innovative and digital, with thought leaders, experts and senior executives who have mastery of operational turnarounds and strategic transformations to help reorientate their enterprises. There's great material to get through here, so let's get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to start this session with Gary Newberry, so it's my pleasure to welcome you, Gary.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in Canada. It's kind of 12:01 somewhere. My name is Gary Newberry. I'm an established Chief Supply Chain Officer within the retail value chain. I am one of Canada's top retail supply chain strategists and serial transformation executives with more than 10 years international C-suite experience across the retail value chain, delivering change. I'm a passionate speaker, as I hope that we get a chance to find out later, podcaster and thought leader on creating strategy and executing effective digital fulfillment to deliver successful 2020s retailing. As many of us on this call might be, I happen to be in transition. So what I'm seeking is a GTA-based retailer looking for a chief supply chain officer to rapidly rebuild supply chain resiliency, which should be on the top of many people's minds right now, especially in this audience, co-create innovation and contribute by accelerating the retail reinvention process, which we'll touch on during this session. Now, I'm going to be working with Miriam to flick through the slides. I'm going to be talking for about 10 minutes, pause for a short period of time to allow people to ask any, let's call it straightforward questions that I'm likely to be able to answer. And then we're going to get into a chunk of our discussion, which I'll lead into a discussion with about 10 minutes of material from me. But I want to give at least half of this hour we've got together to us having an interaction. What I want to do, if I can just have the next slide, please, Miriam, is just to refresh our mind on where we have been in the original kind of schedule of 2 sessions, which led to this one because I had too much material by far. But I think that the conversation from my point of view in terms of what questions were coming up or a really engaging dialogue was starting to develop. We talked about supply chain disruptors as we were going through the pandemic. We talked about some of the consumer behavioural factors, and we dealt with that in the first session. We had a fair discussion during that session after I'd given the materials. Then we talked about, in the second session, we talked about some personal keys for success in supply chain leadership, and these attributes for top executives in Canada and North America. This is like if you're a team leader, assistant team leader, supervisor, manager, director, whatever, there's some consistent themes which emerge for us to have certain types of attributes for us to be successful in leading teams, in progressing our careers. I talked very top level about the history of Canadian retail. I only had about 5 or 10 minutes to get through it all, and there's a lot going on, and penciled out some next steps to reinvention. And then today's thing is all about the retail supply chain design challenges, some of the things that we'll be thinking of in our organizations, or maybe thinking about more widely as we go into retail stores. And there's some supply chain issues here because I can't get my toilet rolls or my pasta or whatever it might be that you're looking for, and the shelf is less than full. So if we can have a next slide, I'm literally going to pile through these. So we talked, as I mentioned, about the supply chain disruptors. We talked a lot about the demand shock, what may have given rise to that, and some of the supply shocks in terms of things like blank sailing and the containers being in the wrong place, which delayed the whole supply chain from working. But one of the things that was quite clear to me that everybody was saying, oh, it's a ball, not from this audience, but in my early study of LinkedIn commentary, was everyone's talking about, oh, it's a bullwhip effect. And I hope that during that session that I was able to disprove that the conditions for the bullwhip effect weren't present in the initial part of the lockdown. Moving on to the next slide. I gave some information about our individual preparedness and our preparedness as a country of individuals for what was ahead of us in terms of the lockdown and as we emerged from it. But one or two really key features in this were the polarization of our net worth as it spread across Canada. Like there's a model that the government uses, or the Parliamentary Budget Office uses to support government policy, which has been rescaled, and it's actually shown that the top 1% of families have access to 25% of the net worth of Canada, and the bottom 40% only 1.2% of net worth, and that's quite dramatic. And I'm sure if I looked at the equivalent figures in the UK, I wouldn't be surprised if it's fairly similar. But that's actually, when you think about that for a moment, that's quite a dramatic spread. And in fact, the bottom 80% only account for broadly 25% of the net worth. So 80% of the people have the net worth of the same 1%. And that shows that we're quite fragile as individuals as we emerge from this weird and very uncertain period, bouncing into almost an even more uncertain period going forward. I think we're down to about 4 million people still uncertain as to whether or not we're employed, unemployed, or somewhere in between. And I think that this will be a recurrent theme for the rest of this year. I think there will be some rebalancing in the early part of next year, but I'm uncertain on that. It's not even a prescription, it's just a guess, really. But I think we've got a structural unemployment that we must face up to. We must help those people who are, needing to be retrained, find jobs, whatever it might be, to actually get them into the work situation again and being productive to help the economy to recover fast. So next slide, please. I talked about 5 key consumer behavior influences. I think the bottom 2, the financial capacity we just dealt with in terms of some of the statistics, and also the prospect of return to work or whether or not we will or not. And then what the working conditions will be, whether or not we will be forced to continue to work from home or return to the workplace. What's that going to look like? How are we actually going to, does that change? Even if we go back to workplace, but we've got this social distancing protocols, will it be anything like what we were used to even as close as February. So if you can just skip over the next slide, please. We just talked about some opportunities, so let's just move on to the next slide. Now, I talked about some personal keys to supply chain leadership, some of the characteristics, the attributes that make successful supply chain folk, professionals. And we spent about 20 minutes on the last call just going through this, and I'm not proposing to do that now, but it's just to say that these are recurrent themes that have happened over a fair amount of time, but they don't just, as I mentioned earlier, they don't just relate to like top executives. They're actually what we do every day. If we are able to demonstrate some ability to communicate a vision, to make sure we finish jobs off properly, hand that down to the people who can do that, and then move on to the next project. And I don't mean that in a project management sense, but the next initiative, the next thing that we need to focus on and to help our organizations to move forward. Being okay about uncertainty, being independently minded, but also being able to shift our paradigm, how we think about things, but to remain independent of some of the stories that sometimes our commercial colleagues and our financial colleagues elude us to think about. If we can just keep some objectivity, I think that stands as a good stance. And then being authentic and very communicative with our staff. As we go through this period of time, we're all facing lots of different types of uncertainty, and being okay about that. Say, look, I really don't know what's ahead of us, but I know that for the next few weeks, this is what we've got to work on to give us a chance to move forward. I talked very briefly about Canadian retailing, about some of the right moves, wrong moves, and the completely indifferent and terrible moves in some ways of what we didn't do in the 2010s. I think that our retail, and bear in mind I'm retail centric, retailers were just chasing the theme of the week, the Omnichannel, the store of future, customer journey, customer experience, AI, ML, blockchain, RFID. They were just chasing things all over the place. They weren't actually doing very much, and they weren't converting those ideas into actionable plans that meant something to their business and their consumers. And I would suggest, in a generality, there was clearly no roadmap to 2020 success. Nobody could have predicted that we would have a pandemic and the government would have locked us down. Business continuity plan should have had pandemics and a whole range of other things in them, but I don't think we would have necessarily added into that. If we're an essential retailer, we would have been kept going. Non-essential retailer, we would not be kept going. But there was no roadmap, even without the pandemic, of how the 2020s was going to shape up. So if we can have the next slide, please. I talked last session about this kind of three-pronged approach to how we actually deliver a transformational change, which allows us to continue to meet the consumer's requirements as they develop, because consumers, as I mentioned earlier on, their mindsets are all changing. What they have valued back in February to what it looked like in May or June or July or now, very different, and we can see that in all the different categories that are bursting through, and certainly home-based kind of spending, discretionary spending and essential spending, do-it-yourself, certain types of gym equipment, whatever, bursting forward, whereas some normal clothing has really suffered. So understanding the consumer and understand we don't know how that consumer is going to twist and turn, we need to develop capabilities. And the approach here was like, in March, it was just get that e-commerce operation up and ready, get it to scale, get those shelves full. It was just do it. But alongside that, it was all these bits of software and processes and ingenuity and intellect, whatever. Let's actually make the transformation happen that should have happened in 2010s. We now have maybe 2 or 3 months to actually transform our business and create capabilities and do it quickly to allow us to map on, if we just step back, to map on to the consumer behavioral changes which influence whether or not we're relevant or not. And then as we move into this new age we're in, and it will constantly change, so we've not arrived at a new normal, we're arriving at a kind of transitionary phase of understanding the world. We will turn certain things off and just enhance those capabilities that we've developed. I introduced the retail concept lifecycle, which sometimes can be called a retail lifecycle for shortness. But really, when we think about products, we have a lifecycle, and why don't we have well, we do have a lifecycle for retail concepts. Over the Canadian Tire, Sobeys are all retail concepts. Typically big box store with a set assortment, some stories and color schemes and whatever else. But a retail concept will go through like a life cycle. It will go through a growth stage, a maturity stage, and most retailers would like to stay in the maturity stage where you have mass adoption, relatively higher margins, and at some point we get into this decline stage, and there is almost an inflection point where we have two choices. We'll probably have three choices. The third choice, which is do nothing, which means you're going to intercept with the x-axis quicker than you'd expect, or to start cutting costs, find cheaper ways of doing things or buying things, or reinvent. And more often than not, many retailers haven't necessarily mapped this curve very well, and if they haven't chosen the most difficult piece of work that they've had in front of them, which is to reinvent their retail concept. If you can just flip the next slide, please, Miriam. Yeah, so is there any questions or anything that you'd like just a little bit more detail at this stage? Because I have still got another 10-15 minutes of slides to quickly work through before we get in our discussion. Just start writing in the chat box if you have any points you'd like to raise, and we'll open mic you and let you loose. Otherwise, we'll press on, I think. So that was just a recap for the first two sessions. So my big question is, we've seen a massive increase in both customer adoption of online and also customer actually using online to satisfy their needs and wants. So we've broadly gone in Canada from a e-commerce percentage of retail sales from about 3.5% on a good day to 10%. And the big question, and I was asked by a press to express a view about this, is that going to carry on? Is that going to accelerate? Is it going to stabilize? Is it going to drop off? And I think that, it'd be foolish to actually say it will do this because we don't know. All I'd say is that I think that now we're coming out of lockdown and more stores are available, I think that people resume a pattern of buying using stores, but they've suddenly become used to the convenience of online, and that will have a residual impact for those people who find convenience as being highly valuable. Then it poses the question, okay, from a retail point of view, does online digital fulfillment, last mile, whatever you like to call it, does it actually pay? And for those people who follow Betteridge's law, if you see a headline, I see a question mark after it. The research says that 90-95% of the time the answer is no. And in this case, I think the answer is no, as we are currently organizing ourselves, and for a whole range of reasons. And I've identified 5 reasons here, which is often when we try to scale something which looks fairly simple, picking singles, put them in the box, give them over to a small package carrier to send off to a customer at home or a point of convenience. As soon as we start to scale this operation, we start to add more stuff in, or whatever, however we try to grow volume into that system, and we suddenly see costs that we didn't expect. And maybe the logistics people have been saying, well, of course, when you ask me to do this, there's going to be costs. And well, don't worry about it. It'll be dealt with in the normal part of our business, don't worry. And all of a sudden those costs start to come out at a great rate of knots, and it's a bit of a surprise. And one of the classic examples of this with Target in the US, in the first quarter, their online business went up to by 141% on, I guess, the previous quarter. And they said there was some kind of uncertainty about like the costs of it. So they somehow turned the corner in quarter 2, and they carried on rocketing forward with their online services, and they didn't take the opportunity to say if there's some costs that came out of woodwork. But that's typically the case, is that things aren't what they seem to be, and sometimes can cause a bit of a shock. The second area is the customer acquisition costs, or what we might loosely call the ad spending. And a classic example of this is Wayfair. where they spend something in the order of $250 million worth of ad spending, so adverts, stuff on the internet, whatever it might be. And they've always made a loss up until the last quarter of about $250 million. And for a retailer, you have to look at how much money you're spending to acquire a customer to actually get them to go onto your online platform, use your app or whatever it might be, and make a purchase, and think about the cycle time and the value of that. So if you're, typically a Wayfair one-off customer, you might see some furniture and you might buy it. The chance of you buying it again in the next year, next 10 years sometimes, is pretty remote. So when you look at the LTV, the lifetime value, which is a discounted cash flow of the gross margins on a yearly basis, and you're trying to make a balance between the costs of actually advertising to initially create that customer and then to maintain their interest in you, and the cycle of buying and the margin that arises from that over a period of time. Those two things can be very quickly out of balance, and Wayfair, in this case, is a classic example of that. Whereas Walmart, you're likely to buy something from Walmart if you're using their online services maybe every week, every 4 or 5 days, who knows. So that equation is better balanced for people with products that form more of a everyday purchase kind of diet. How do you deliver the service? Is it super quick, on demand, or is it scheduled where you give delivery slots to customers and they pick one and you deliver it hopefully within that scheduled time window? And just as a sort of a kind of thing around that, I mean, I was asked by Retail Insider to talk about Costco, and I have to tell you, it was a delightful experience. A couple of Sundays ago, I haven't known I was going to be asked to comment about it. I thought I'd better order something from Costco, and Costco's about, I don't know, 3 or 4 miles away, probably less than that. So I ordered 3 lines at 12 o'clock on a Sunday. I selected the free 2-hour delivery, and because the 3 items I ordered were way over $35, and anybody who shops at Costco knows that you can build up a big bill very quickly of lots of stuff that you want, but when you buy it in bulk, it's quite expensive. If you can go back to the previous slide, please, and the previous one. Thank you. That was with me within 40 minutes. I mean, that's outstanding. It's better than actually getting into your vehicle, driving there, putting your card, doing that kind of stuff, going around the shop, sitting in the queue, trying to get out, getting the person looking at your ticket, looking at your basket, going in, packing your car. 40 minutes. I would have done more than 40 minutes just actually buying those 3 things myself. But the issue is, if I now give a more complex basket, say 50 items, my expectation is now being set at 40 minutes. Are they likely to surprise and delight me further, or slightly disappoint me, but still be within 2 hours, but disappoint my expectation? And my view on that is, if I had been Costco in that situation, although their communication to me, I knew exactly what was going on all throughout that kind of order lead time, because they gave me some great communications, I would have held that over for nearly 2 hours and just delivered it within the 2 hours, so it manages that expectation. However, on demand means when you've got a small scale, it's fairly easy to kind of do that. It's when you try to scale that operation up and all of a sudden you run out of on-demand capacity, and then which customer is going to say, oh, it used to be free, but now it's $10 because I've asked my 2-hour window to be in a very busy slot, in which case I have to pay a premium to secure my order. Another big area is retailers are renowned for SKU proliferation, putting more items on the shelf. And the thing is, if I'm now looking at retailers who offer 3 online delivery, I could actually say, if I have a basket of, I've got my shopping list is say $250, and most of the people have minimums of $25, $30 or whatever, and then you get free delivery. I could actually search 4 or 5 retailers under that scenario and actually pick off all their lower priced products, maybe running promotions, loss leaders, So I just go around and from my shopping list, I just go, I have that from Loblaws, that from Sobeys, that from Metro, that from Longo's, that from Save on Food, wherever it might be. And all of a sudden, the retailer will see their basket size has diminished. The number of items in there, so the price, the average unit price is actually diminished, and the margin is super diminished. And on top of that, the customer's asking us to deliver it to their home at a certain time. And there'll be a realization, we hope, in retail that that's probably not a very helpful strategy to try and win business and build a profitable business. And the last point is, although consumers love free delivery and they love hassle-free returns, retailers are paying for this, or if we say retailers, I mean other customers, other consumers are actually somehow paying for this if the retailer is still profitable. So somebody going into the store is basically almost cross-subsidizing home delivery. And that might actually, if people thought about that for a little longer, they may actually start thinking, well, do you know what? Going into the stores, it can be a little bit unsafe. You have to wear a mask and all normal stuff. You might bump into people who don't wear a mask, and that might cause some people a bit of a challenge. You know what? I'm gonna get my shopping done by online and get it delivered to my home, and they can do all the messing about. That's a very expensive operation for a retailer, and when that scales up to 50, 60, 70% of their business is actually going online, to a grocer, say, that could be a real big tipping point to say yes or no, do we need to do this anymore? So who's eating my lunch? Well, it's an interesting question. All these factors all add up to a situation where it doesn't pay. So I'm going to press on quickly. Sorry, I've dwelled on this slide for probably too long, but omnichannel. So during the 2010s, there's a lot of talk about omnichannel, and there are three basic competencies. One is supreme end-to-end real-time value chain inventory accuracy. You've got to know where your inventory is at any one time, and that it's not just in your own supply chain, your own four walls, your warehouse, your stores, anywhere in between, but your suppliers, their suppliers, etc. One view of the customer, so you can actually see their searching behavior, how they toggle between online and in-store activity. And then once you've got that whole picture, to deliver a deeply personal experience, which is based on their specific habits. So you really appeal to them, and you try and aim at individual delight. So the biggest challenge from us, from logistics side of life, is how do we minimize the cost of the last mile? Where's the best place to do all this? What's the modeling of all this? And the general theory at the moment is to push the whole 50 pallets worth into the stores where they already do singles picking and put it on the shelf, but to find a way of doing that same operation but for e-commerce, online services such as click and collect and home delivery. So that sort of leads us down to a path, which is automation for that. I call it backroom sortation. We effectively move the back wall. Hopefully people can still hear me. So if you can remember what the slide said, I was starting to talk about automation and the backroom sortation. The backroom sortation is basically saying move the wall at the back of the store, which has normally been crushed right down, so you just literally unload a truck and get as much out onto the floor as possible on a weekly delivery or whatever. It's to actually move that wall close to the front of a store. And the reason, the justification for that is that if I've got a piece of automated equipment which is storing that week's delivery in there, I can actually just meter out a daily replenishment to the shelf. So the shelf, the item profile on the shelf, instead of it being that, like a week's worth of stock, it actually be a day's worth of stock, and it can be still kept full, which means you can compress all the shelf space down to something a bit more reasonable, so people can actually get a really tremendous array. Or you can just go one more step and say, well, do you know what? For our loyal customers, we actually want to motivate them to do everything online and then come to the store if they want to. Come inside to the store and have a look at new staff, or go and do their produce shopping or their protein shopping, and the rest of it, the staples, we'll organize from our automated micro fulfillment center, and we'll have their shopping ready for them to come and pick up when they're ready. There's some sort of logic on that, and the use of automation in this environment allows us to improve our inventory accuracy, which is a big issue for many retailers. They put inventory up on the internet, and it's kind of like, as a consumer, you can think, have they really got it or not? What's the frequency of update and how accurate is it? The other one is consistency, because if you're having some kind of in-store operation for fulfilling online services, then you have to be sure your people are going to turn up. And if like Stanley Cup's on a Sunday, are they going to be turning up on the next day? And if they are they going to be wide awake and fully efficient? So the automation actually takes that concern away to an extent, and it also reduces the unit picking and packing costs. So I'm going to press on to the next slide. You're back. Welcome back. I'm on slide 14. So some of the retail supply chain design, some sort of questions around this, and I'm conscious of I'm eating too much time again, is the whole concept of going local, actually buying from local. And there's a great weekend going on, I think it's called Canada United, and it's encouraging us all, and I would encourage us all to go out and find our local stores, and hopefully they're buying from local manufacturers and artisans and stuff, and try and support Canada as opposed to very geographically dispersed supply chain product. In some ways, nearshoring or even reshoring stuff into our economy is good for our economy, it's good for our employment prospects, it's good for naturally our wages, I would imagine. It also allows us to be a lot more flexible as a nation about our products that we have, because we don't have to do container loads of product before we get access to them. We can actually do small production runs, and that allows us to have probably more variety at any point in time. It's also incredibly green if we're just shifting from a manufacturing Mississauga to a store in Brampton, rather than a manufacturing Wuhan to a store in Brampton. And we have to look at all these things, because I think cost is going to be a big factor in this. Everyone's got a picture of it. Of course, if we make it local, it's going to cost more. Well, we have to look at a more holistic picture of cost and all the risks that are involved with a geographically dispersed supply chain or supply network. Now, I want to just talk about pivoting, because it drives me insane. I don't know, everyone seems to be got diseased or infected by pivoting. We're pivoting here, pivoting there. And I touched on this last time. I said that this is one thing that drives me mad as a supply chain person, is that a pivot, in my definition of a word, is just a relatively small change within an operating capability we already had, which we make to realize either because of a burning platform, something happened to us, we had to, or it was a commercial opportunity such as making PPE. So we just pivoted, we just changed slightly our method of production if we're CPG to do this, and we pivoted, but suddenly everybody's pivoting like crazy. And the trouble with, while we're talking about pivoting and it's very fashionable and it sounds very dynamic and wonderful, we actually are not doing what we really need to do, which is a major rethink of supply chain network design. And I would ask people who are in the throes of pivoting just to step back and actually think about, are we missing a trick here? Should we be changing our operational model? And I would argue, should we be changing some parts of our business model to better respond to things that are going to be ahead of us during the next few years? And what does supply chain resiliency actually mean? At a very simple level, it's the amount of weeks. If we measure disruption in terms of weeks, if we have a supply network that can respond and cover, say, 6 weeks of production or of sales, and the disruption is 4 weeks, we appear to be resilient, or I might argue otherwise. If those figures go the other way, we have a shortage, in which case we're not resilient. But I think that we need to really examine some more depth about the sense of what does resiliency actually mean. And I've put a reference to a guy called Jim Tompkins. Some people may already know him, but from his flyers that he keeps sending out from time to time. But if you have a chance, go on to YouTube, find Jim Tompkins and find one of his more recent YouTube videos, podcasts, where he demonstrates that for many, many years, and I'm not going to give him too much justice here in 30 seconds, but he's basically saying that we've designed our supply chain networks to be very efficient, to only cope with very small, narrowly defined variations in volume. And we know about the peak, but we know it every year. It's about the same, and it happens about the same. Maybe it might be a week or two early, it might be just slightly more or slightly less, but it's almost very predictable. However, this pandemic has taught us life isn't like that. It can be, things can break and things can shoot out from left field, and we have to design things for optionality. We need to have capacity to do different things rather than just being very efficient. So I think on the next slide, I'm going to now open up to questions. As I say, I'm conscious I've just eaten up so much time. So I hope I've filled in some backgrounds, given some context for these kind of questions that I'd like to have a discussion with you guys about, which is, okay, so I've described a certain way that people are thinking about. My thoughts are slightly different to this, but what are the alternatives? Is micro-fulfillment within the retail supply chain, having stuff picked at stores, either automated or manually picked, is this the end game? And what roles do you think CPGs might play in a post-pandemic world? And whatever that is, can they actually scale that activity or that role? I'm going to shut up for a few minutes while you gather your thoughts, and perhaps just imagine it's like integrated supply chain. It's the final exam. You've been asked a question, you're the logistics guy, and your boss has run down the corridor and say, hey, is this the end game, Gary? What do you think? And at one level, you're kind of saying, well, this is quite a challenging thing, but probably you will have said, do you know what, guys? I've been saying this for some time, and I'm glad I've got the opportunity in the forum to actually vent some thoughts about where I think we should be going. So please, if you want to ask a question or add to the debate, that'd be great. To warm things up, Barry's asked, are we heading back to a consumer distributed model? I wasn't here then, but we did have in the UK an equivalent of that called Argos, where you used to run into the store, flick through a catalogue, write down your requirements, and this might be the same or very similar to consumer distributing, and you went to the desk to submit your docket, and they would tell you, oh, we've got it, we get it, and about 5-10 minutes later, some person would run up and put it on the belt, and it would go to the server, and they would give it to you, or they'd say, sorry, we haven't got that, we've got a stock out, but we have got these things. You have to fill out another ticket and tell us what you want, and I'll key it in and tell you if I've got stock or not. But it was a way of recording true demand, and it was literally a backroom sortation situation. There was no aisles, it was just a bunch of table with catalogues on them, and people just, as I say, wrote out chitties, and they got processed, and people walked out the store with cased product. Peter, do you want to ask your question?
Good afternoon. Hi, Gary.
Hi.
Yeah, more of a comment, but I was thinking, what about vertical residences or high density areas? I mean, it'll never be the end game. Everyone will need to have products delivered to their home to be able to function in society. And I'm not trying to get too draconian or apocalyptic here, but I'm thinking, if you're in a vertical residence of say 500 people, just to take a number, what if they all ordered through a channel, and a truck shows up at a certain time and with packages for all the residences? Something like that, where you're consolidating everything into one truck. It's picking all the orders, you're consolidating in one truck, going to a residence, and that's your delivery. Say you have deliveries 3 times a week, and you can count on that, and it's scheduled. I'm just thinking of a way to unclog the system, and unfortunately, remove that customer experience of going to a shop or to the Loblaws so that they don't even need the Loblaws. I don't know. It's kind of something I'm thinking of here in regards to the end game or the Hunger Game or whatever you want to call it. It's just, there seems to be a lot of stuff out on the internet where, you know, society is heading, and that might play out. I don't know. I'll leave it with you.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in your question, in the sense of, are we kind of planning for the next couple of years? Are we planning for generations in terms of our urban design? And I know a few years ago, I think Costco, Nordstrom, some mall owners, some landlords all got together, and I think it was Seattle, to work through what this might look like. I think if they did it now, they may actually come to a slightly different conclusion, because perhaps one of their assumptions was people would still go to work, people would still live in these high density areas because of the entertainment, you know, the restaurants, etc., and also where they worked. But as we move into this world of some companies actually seeing our people are more productive working from home, and if all we have to do is create some social space somewhere, I don't think Zoom's the answer to that on a more visceral basis, but we may have some alternative office accommodation rather than in downtown. So for me, there's a lot of things that have now been, I wouldn't say forced to the fore, and of course the supply chain has to kind of understand what that might look like, and then develop systems and the processes to be able to sort that. The idea of consolidating into a local hub. I mean, I remember having a conversation back in 1997 when I was talking to a guy from Black & Decker back in the UK. It said that my vision of how this might roll out, and of course thought on beyond that, is people, and this is before we had a lot of internet and a lot of email stuff in the UK. Canada was a little bit advanced compared to us, but I think we should have a hub literally in a local neighborhood. It could be to a vertical building or it could be to a high density area, but they have a hub and people deliver their stuff into that, and then a system to let people know it's arrived, and then to set up, you know, time windows for delivery so that they will get that stuff when they're in. You know, that was 23 years ago, and we're still miles away from that. All we have to do is go down into New York in one of the main sort of residential areas in there and see the absolute mayhem. A small package carrier who just park up for the day and just unload their vehicle into one building. And then they've got other small package carriers doing exactly the same. There has to be some rethinking of how do small package carriers collaborate either in territories or in how they approach these kind of things. And while they have all the antitrust things and stuff like that getting in the way, it's actually causing lots of congestion and waste and anti-green stuff going on, because the law needs to be moderated towards allowing FedEx, UPS, Purelator, you name them, to collaborate to reduce that urban congestion. Is there anybody else who would like to ask a question or contribute to the discussion? We're looking at alternatives to this almost linear path that we're traveling on of move the stock to place in a territory, get some automation, some MFC, a micro fulfillment center to shuffle things around so that it fills up the store, allows click and collect to happen, and home delivery. Is there another play that CPGs working either against or with retailers can do things differently that you can think of? Because this is totally a logistics problem. This isn't beyond, if anybody thinks it's a retailing problem, it's not. It is purely a supply chain logistics challenge for us as individuals, as professionals, to kind of come up with some creative scheme and help organizations that we work for to implement. Oh, Barry, do you want to, Miriam, would you be able to open up Barry's line? I'm just trying to read your question in advance.
Gary, I'm unmuted.
Okay, cool, excellent. Do you want to pose your question?
I guess my observation from working on an LTL carrier dock, living in the West in a city of a couple 100,000, is that some of these models won't work in these smaller cities, right? So,
Barry, could you mic's up and down a bit? So I don't know if you could just move towards a mic or hold it, or I don't know what equipment you've got.
after working on an LTL dock for some time, you realize that some of these models are very hard to do. And it also, depending on the size of the community in the city, you know, having a half a day delivery accomplishment is a challenge, right? Because you actually have the physical movement of the goods you have to deal with, right? So I think you're going to have a hybrid model, right? Anyway, it'll be the physical movement of the goods that become, a lot of times it's the constraint, because you just can't do it in the time, right?
Yep.
And the reality of it is, if your idea of a consolidated neighborhood model, that'll have to be driven somewhat by public policy and quite possibly by carbon house gas emission restrictions that'll do it. And might be some communities that started and see it as a model initially. That's how it might, we'll have to watch it all unfold. And the other side is that everybody is, you know, competing against each other and somewhat, I guess, competing against each other and their own freedom and what's the right term here? Independence is going to be actually a huge constraint in the consolidation of these kind of distribution models.
Yeah, I've been arguing for a long time, and I think you've seen me on LinkedIn from time to time go on a rant about this, that the only way small package carriers are going to have a business model, a market to go for, because Amazon is coming after their lunch, is to collaborate. Whether or not it actually ends up being things like legal devices like joint ventures, I'm not convinced it needs to go down that route, but they need to collaborate on territories and where they pick things up, how they process things and how they deliver them. So if you go into a high density thing that you just have, like on my leafy boulevard, I have 3 or 4 small package carriers going down there every day. So I see a FedEx guy once a day when I'm on my walk, and maybe a UPS guy. I see the enterprise van, which is Amazon. I see a Go Logistics, which I think is another version of Amazon. And I see some other, I see Vocational Purelator, I see Canada Post. They're all coming into my leafy boulevard. Please stop doing that. Please find a way of consolidating somehow and bringing it all together. And if I know, and also don't do it during the day. Most people who order stuff don't want it during the day. They want it when they're at home from work. Okay, we're in a strange kind of world where quite a lot of people are actually at home. But when we get back to some version of normal, or where people go out to work as opposed to work from home, the depositing of packages on people's doorsteps is going to be a high risk for retailers and or their carriers. The consumer would just say porch piracy, and then the retailer rushes around trying to patch that up for the consumer. We need to find ways of making sure that we ensure that we deliver to the consumer when they're at home or at the point of convenience when they actually can receive it. So yeah, in terms of LTL and trying to bring things together, I mean, the LTL network is not dissimilar in, you know, it's a kind of more chunky version of the hub and spokes which small package delivery companies use, and there are a whole range of different constraints and factors. But if they're all competing against each other, so basically the same geographical territories, there's only one winner, and it's not an LTL or a small package carrier. It's likely to be, for B2C, it's likely to be Amazon.
I think Walmart is coming up with some interesting aspects in their model or their methodology, allowing, what I can tell, Walmart is allowing other people to push into their distribution network, and you can have at store pickup in Walmart.
Well, the easiest, or I wouldn't say it's the most scalable operation that Walmart, Costco, Staples, M&M Food Market, just to name a few that just come off the head. Instacart it's a, you know, effectively a crowdsourced solution at variable costs, very little startup. Once you've done your IT interfaces and you've put your assortment up on their website, if people want to use Instacart to come into your store, but then you're competing online with, you know, your competitors, they can scale an operation pretty quickly as long as they get hold of the live bodies to do this. But I'm not convinced that they deliver a branded delivery experience, a branded kind of handover of the product. So there's alternatives, but you've got to weigh up all the different risks and rewards of those, or frictions that a consumer will receive or not receive, to try and work out how consumer-centric are you wanting to be. And consumer-centric means how branded is your experience of delivering product to the consumer, either in-store, click and collect, home delivery, or any other version of online services that can be had. So I think Peter's just asked how far off drone delivery. We actually, weirdly enough, Canada is out there sailing forward. I think over in BC somewhere, we've had drone deliveries in remote rural areas for quite some time, maybe 18 months, a year, 2 years, whatever it is. And it's all just quietly got on. How soon are we likely to see mainstream drone deliveries to my doorstep in the GTA? That's the sort of golden question. There's a lot of talk about, yeah, this would be a great thing because take up the whole thing. We just have drones that can have a small package underneath them, and in 30 minutes time I can order something from somewhere and it gets delivered. That's fantastic, but I'm not convinced that I want to see a load of drones running my skyline. I quite like seeing blue sky without too much disturbance in it. But I think that certainly within the next, let's say, 5 years, it will become slightly commonplace, and all it would take is 1 or 2 disasters and we go back to the Stone Age. But I would like to see some way of with drones and some form of road transport being used in combination initially to get the thing done. And certainly for remote and rural areas, this is a great opportunity for drones, and the bigger drones where they can actually take a fair amount of weight. Maybe your weekly shop is a great way of using drones. But I think in the US they're very suspicious of drone. Legislature is very don't like, no, because they imagine somewhere like New York, all those parcels being distributed delivered by these small package carriers, all being done by drones instead. And it's like they just kind of see this like almost fly-infested skies of drones. How do we get going? How do we scale it? How do we make profit? But now Amazon went from next day to next month. I stopped all my spending with Amazon as soon as they did that. And I was quite keen to see, when you have that picture in your mind, you kind of don't want, it's like very unnatural. Now I'm conscious that we're close to the end. I'm just going to plug one thing. I'm doing on behalf of CITT, I'm doing a presentation about some aspect of retail supply chain with a group of people that I regularly do a podcast with, and we're doing it on the 8th of October at 2 p.m. on the Supply Chain Canada annual conference. I've asked Miriam to see if she can reach out to Pina and see if we can, as CITT members, get access to that. So please, if we do, please join that. You'll find that to be a very interesting discussion, much more far-reaching than when I've got my colleagues with me than I am on my own. We're just trying to look at William's question. Would Amazon be a winner? As I've seen since lockdown, the delivery time has elongated. Yes. Well, yeah, it went from next day to next month in April. And I thought it was a golden opportunity for Canadian-based retailers trying to struggle to get off their click and collect and home delivery operations. They had, like, Amazon was out the way. We've never had that before. Since they've come here, they've like been quite recognizable and to an extent slightly dominant in the online space because they already know what they're doing. Whereas our retailers are like, oh yeah, I know we need to do this e-commerce thing, but where do we start? At Canadian Tiles, at Home Depots and the like. Actually step up and go, hey, we're going to have a bit of a wobble, but guys, we're going to make this work for you as consumers. And I have to say, my personal view on that is they failed miserably. So Amazon then resumed their next day service. They've still got stock outs all over the place. So on my wish list, I've got all blanks or greys out. So I know I can't have that, but pretty much everything that's on there under Prime, I can still have next day if I choose to. And that's just going to, the stock coverage or the ability for them to have stock available for me to do next day, I think that's just going to grow. Uber Freight is already operational. I wonder if this is going to operate in Canada. I think Uber Freight, I had this conversation, I'm now conscious that we've just hit 1 o'clock. I just want to finish this point. Uber Freight isn't anything more than a load broker with a bit of tech behind them. It's just, whereas a load broker would just flick through the thing and say, hey, I've got the load for you, or I've got this carrier for you. It's just, Uber Freight is just like the software that just allows people with capacity and loads just to better match, more so than me sitting on my phone going, oh, I've just got a phone call, oh, do you want a load, kind of thing. So it improves the visibility and transparency of these things which were prior perhaps a little bit less clear. And there may be some advent of peak pricing. There may be lanes that have a lot of load but not very much capacity, and there may be a pricing mechanism that's enhanced. Will it come to Canada? There shouldn't be any reason why it shouldn't, but it's not going to be, it's just going to be a bit better than just perhaps using a load broker. It's just a bit faster, a bit more visible. It's not like Uber, the taxi company, which was fundamentally changing the whole nature of the taxi and marketplace, because it went from you have to be properly licensed and have a car and all criminal checks and all that lot, to somebody who can just jump in the car and say, hey, I've got some capacity in my car. Can I take you somewhere, sir? So I'm going to finish off. Miriam, are you here?
I am back, and I do apologize for the internet connection problems that I was experiencing. I thank you for everyone. You will be receiving the recording link from me this afternoon. And as Gary mentioned, I will keep you posted on the opportunity to attend this presentation that he's doing on October. Thank you, everyone. I wish you a great afternoon. Thank you, Gary, for this great presentation. And we hope to see you soon for the next webinar. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for listening today. I hope the information has been valuable for you and your team. You can connect with me via the website retail.ca and go to the contact page, or via LinkedIn by typing linkedin.com/in/last-mile. Look forward to hearing from you and playing an active part with your supply chain and your business's transformation as you start to act boldly, think big, scale, adapt, and win.